Welcome, everyone. Our next speaker is Larisa Freiverts from Anglicare, Victoria. Larisa is a team leader and senior family therapist of the Meridian Youth and Family Therapy team at Anglicare, Victoria. And she'll speak to us about Breaking the Cycle, a program for supporting parents and carers to maintain relationships with their young person while finding ways to hold that young person responsible and accountable for their actions. She was meant to be here with her colleague Shannon, but she has suddenly had to cancel. So Larisa will take over and be two presenters today. So I hand over the stage to her.
Hi there, everyone. So welcome, and I guess you'll get to hear a little bit more about breaking the cycle. And I guess before we start, I do want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land of which we meet today and pay respects to Aboriginal peoples, elders past, present and emerging. So you got my introduction of who I am. Shannon, unfortunately, hasn't been able to come today, but she is really happy to be contacted. So there's an email address at the end if you have any questions around the program that they've been delivering for about 11 months in functional family therapy. So just while Okay, thank you. I'm getting the feedback, the echo. So just to get to know who's here in the audience, I'm just wondering whether people are happy to put up their hands just quickly. Who of you here are in the community sector? Okay, a lot. How about policy or research? How many of you would feel that you know a lot about adolescent violence in the home? You? Okay. How many of you know anything about or have heard anything about breaking the cycle? A few. How about functional family therapy? Okay, so even not. Okay, so I will try to speak to that. Shannon and I did meet and talk a little bit around what are some of the commonalities, but also the key differences around our programs. So we were wanting to provide a snapshot about it. I'll, in short notice, try to talk a little bit more about breaking the cycle. So both of our programs recognises that adolescent violence significantly disrupts family relationships and has a destructive impact on all relationships. And we do really work towards engendering hope and optimism and work towards reducing blame and a singular focus on the young person's behaviour. They're both relational-based interventions, so our family is our client. We're seeking opportunities for safe connection, and we're continuously assessing and responding to risk in the home. Some of the key differences is that breaking the cycle offers a tailored response specific to adolescent violence. So we focus on safety and patterns of violence which impact on how families relate. I'll repeat that because it's a core thing. So we're focusing on how the patterns of violence impact how the family relates, and that's what we're working with. Our underlying principles of breaking the cycle is that in the first instance we're making changes in the parenting so that they can support their young person to take responsibility for their violence. Because we're a voluntary service and we know that most young people are really not willing or easily wanting to talk about their behaviours. And we also know that unless we actually attend to the context in which the young person is living, so their family home life, that actually only small amount of changes will be made. We actually avoid the strong invitation to fix my kid, because actually this can inadvertently make things worse. And our work with parents or carers, we always hold the young person in mind. So often we're having to hold a real strong sense of the importance of having empathy for the young person. We also know that young people are often, but not always, less prepared to address their own behaviour until the adult has changed theirs. And that's part of the process, and that's what we're doing. And we don't exclude where there is imminent risk. So we're working with that. So I always kind of say we're working towards getting violence out of the home, not the young person. And this program has been developed and tested and delivered by Anglicare for 30 years. So we've got a lot of voices of parents and carers and their experiences. When you come to functional family therapy, they hold a holistic view of family function, and they see that the family is critical to initiate changes in the family, and they're relentless in their engagement with the family, and all key players must be present in the intervention to move if it's safe to do so. So actually is a key difference. If there is no imminent risk, they will do work, but if it is, if they assess that their risk is present, they will refer on. So often they'll be referring to breaking the cycle. Some of the commonalities are that they're also looking at patterns of behaviour and what might be some appropriate times to intervene before escalations. And they do a lot of safety planning with the families. But it's an emerging kind of program, and they're really having to learn to consider the issues of adolescent violence. To try to give you a little bit of context, we call ourselves the Meridian Youth and Family Therapy Team, and we're a team of social workers, psychologists and family therapists. We've always maintained a relational-based focus and work and a high level of professionalism. That being said, adolescent violence in the home is probably about 80% of what we do. So to talk about that, I kind of talk about breaking the cycle, which is a group work program that we do, but we also are able to provide the wraparound support. So I kind of call that breaking the cycle family therapy. But it's kind of one and the same. So for those who don't know, Breaking the Cycle is an 8-week therapeutic group work program for parents or carers who have an adolescent who is violent in the home. And it's been developed and delivered for about 30 years. We've done about 3 evaluations of the program, and bang for buck, it is really, really effective. It's been delivered across a number of other agencies as well. This is the manual, so this is everything that we know on paper. So it's a resource that we distribute widely for people because it's used by a lot of individuals. So it's our 2nd edition, and part of that was really responding to some key changes that we were seeing in practice, which was original research came out of work with mothers and young boys that were violent, and we were increasingly seeing couples engaging fathers and stepfathers, carers, kinship carers and foster carers that were also dealing with the issue, and also seeing some real changes in the parenting cohort. So the baby boomer generation are very different to Gen X and Gen Y. Some of those differences that we were finding was an increased level of retribution, so getting even by the parents, a stronger sense of fix my kid, and you work a lot harder to try to invite parents to see that they're part of the solution. And also that we're finding that a lot of practitioners were trying to address the issue into their day-to-day work, and so we made it as a resource, not just a group work program. And it's kind of the core kind of principles and strategies and core components that we focus on are pretty specific. So we do lots of training, and we also do a lot of consultation. So our consultation, we do about 250 secondary and primary consultations a year. We're not funded for it, but it's a way of responding to the demand and the skill, workforce skill development that's out there, and it helps us support other staff that are really struggling. So it's helpful. Ultimately, however, a lot of the workforce is still saying that it needs to be a specialist response. And it's we're also working across a real continuum. So our program, we work with young people aged 10 to 23 and their families, so we're often engaging families at the point of first incident, so the first time a parent's kind of going, shit, this is serious, to also a cohort where I'll say they're violent everywhere and there's an awful lot of risk factors that are happening. However, that being said, 75% of the people we work with have really positive outcomes in less than 11 months. And the cohort I call BTC Family Therapy Plus is a 25% of the cohort that we're getting, which is often a lot of child protection referrals and really high risk behaviours that are happening. And it just takes a heck of a lot longer, and you're having to work with the barriers and constraints. Mostly it will be trauma, and we're looking at multi-generational trauma and abuse. So I try to kind of put it across that continuum. This is some of our data, and it was interesting kind of hearing some of the research that's happening around the place. This is a bit of a snapshot of data that I've tried to collate from multiple sources and reporting sources in our agency, so it's not an easy task, across 5 years. Of those that have attended our family therapy program, and it will be similar with those that attend Breaking the Cycle. Probably the core differences will be that our referral pathway into our group program is probably predominantly parents, so they're parents hunting us down and desperately looking for a solution. What we say and what we know from our experience is that where there's adolescent violence, the young person often has a lot of other issues. And we see that those issues, whatever they might be, cannot and are not easily addressed until the violence stops. And the young person does not, even when we engage them, and we engage about 40% of the young people, they will still say that the core reason they'll come to talk to us is not about their violence. We see that there is still a gender focus, 60% are male, 40% are female. I used to say that there was a difference between the types of violence that girls and young men were using, and actually we're not seeing that in practice anymore. So in the past I'd say that young women were emotionally abusive and would threaten self-harm or suicide, and actually we're seeing probably the same levels of physical, emotional and property damage across the gender. When it comes to the age range, the peak is 13 to 15, but when you break that down a little bit, 11% of 10 to 12-year-old males, so they kind of get noticed a little bit earlier, when it's 4% for females of that age range. Our peak is 30% males and 24% females in the 13 to 15-year-old age group. And then we also have 14% and 9 for males and 9% for females in the 16-year-old age group. And we do often find that over time we might meet the parents in the group when they're dealing with their young person that might be 12 or 13, and actually then they might re-engage or be more able to get their young person willing to engage with us when they're 16 to 17, or there will be other issues that are driving them to come, but there's a level of relationship and trustworthiness. The young person's kind of going, you mob are okay because you kind of changed my parents and they're the reason why I was violent, and now I'm willing to talk about what's happening for me. And the same when it comes to disability. For those that have been diagnosed, I would say it's 26% of our young people have a disability. There's a whole cohort that are undiagnosed and refusing to ever be diagnosed, which will probably sit at the 50 to 60% mark. And of that, the highest will be autism, so high functioning autism. And when it comes to mental health, it's the same. 58% have a diagnosed mental health issue, and about 19% will also identify having complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So that fits within our kind of cohort of 25% that we're kind of doing in a very intensive 12 plus months of work. When it comes to what parents are asking for, 74% are saying that they want issues between themselves and their young person to be addressed. So often they are also kind of saying or naming it as conflict or a relational issue, not naming it as violence. There will be 23% also are saying that there's couple issues, so whether they're step-parenting an intact couple or separated. And there's also 19% that are saying there's sibling conflict. So that's just a snapshot. This is my attempt to you guys to put 360 pages into what are the core focus areas. So what does the work look like and what are we doing? I say that the core focus areas, so we're building readiness to engage the young person, and how we approach it is the focus areas are reciprocal. But what relationship repair might look like for the parents is very different to what it might look like for the young person. Or what stopping the violence looks like might be a little bit different to how we try to encourage a young person to take responsibility. So they're the components. Our overarching first principle, which we go back to time and time again, is safety. So safety is always our first priority, and achieving safety is the focus of the work. So this is the therapy. We use the cycle of adolescent violence as a key strategy, and this is kind of the scaffolding around the work. And the cycle of adolescent violence helps us explore timing. So sometimes what parents are doing is not wrong, just the timing of it's not particularly great. Setting a consequence in the face of imminent violence is not a good idea. Nobody's listening, nobody's thinking. And we're also looking at the patterns of behaviour and dynamics between people. So adolescent violence has a dynamic, it's a process, it's evolved over time. And my metaphor always is that we're testing out what are the ingredients that become the weed killer that ensures that violence can't grow in the home. So we're changing the conditions in which violence can thrive, because we know that lots of parents have often responded in their attempts to try to control and manage their young person with violence. There's a huge amount of shame, and by saying this is everybody's responsibility and everybody's working together, it takes away the shame and it takes away the scapegoating. So it's a core way in which we approach it. When we're looking at confidence and competence, This is something that I think powerfully happens and is most effective in a group work program, because these are parents that feel isolated, they feel shamed and blamed, they feel responsible, or they're just damn sick of it and they want their kid out. And that actually getting a whole component of parents dealing with it in different ways, or having had some changes along the way, often provide an enormous support in decreasing the shame and blame and stigma, and they become such a powerful resource. So nothing takes away shame more than relationship and naming what's happening. So we did some research recently, and it's like we use an Adolescent Violence behaviour questionnaire, and one of the components of it is looking at parents' level of distress and disturbance. So parents usually see that around, I have some sense of knowing what I need to do, and despite what's happening, I can stop and I can think. So they feel confident in their parenting and their strategies and their approach. When we ask parents at the beginning of a group, how distressed or disturbed are they? On average, so we've done about 80 attendees now, they're saying about 7, 8, 9% disturbed. Our average is about 7. By week 8, it's down to 4, and 12 months post BTC group, it's 2.5. So you're seeing the flow-on effects. So that's a huge element for parents. And when it, so I was about to say I missed a bit about our safety planning, but you can ask me questions. And relationship repair, that's something that in our current resource guide we really had to think through and develop and overt more. It used to be a bit more implied, but actually with the cohort of parents that we get now, we're actually having to teach the steps of empathy and what relationship repair looks like in greater detail. And ultimately that's what parents are asking for. And it's also what the young person is wanting, for things to be better at home. And we already know that adolescence is a pretty tough time, and it does require transformation of relationships. So there already is a change in family rules and patterns. And we know that that process is significantly disrupted by adolescent violence. So there's a whole lot of learning opportunities by the young person that doesn't happen, and there's a whole lot of parenting opportunities that don't happen. So a lot of the work is around helping to teach and support parents to restore trust and forgiveness. So the way that I language that, or something that parents find really helpful, is how to move away from a parenting for or a kind of a power over response to a parenting with, and that's around a power with. And what I mean by that is, so my definitions of power with is around how to manage strong emotions. And that parents are able to be consciously aware of around what's happening in front of them, what's the problem, to be able to slow things down, to make a choice, act on those choices, and reflect on what happened next. So ultimately we're teaching parents again and again who are traumatised by the violence that's happening in the home, and it's significant, to get out of freeze. So as soon as there's shame and blame, they're going to be in freeze, to get them out of fight or flight, and to get them into a capacity to safely connect. And that means that they need to be in their frontal lobes. And more often than not, we've got a young person that's less able to do it. So a big motivator is around saying that your parents are part of the brain building business, and they're helping model and help their young person get into their frontal lobes so that they can do more talking, not just act out in violence. So trauma and attachment is a huge part of the work, and often the stuff that can really get in the way. And we do have to acknowledge that, 25% of the families that we're doing intensive and long-term work with have experienced multi-generational abuse and trauma. So we have to get behind that, and we have to do the deeper work. Within the BTC group work program, we attend to it in different ways, and that can make a huge difference. Got 5 minutes. When it comes to the young person, the core aim is that we're trying to say that we're not trying to get them out of the home, and we're trying to repair the relationship. In the first instance, it has to be the parents initiating that, and violence is not happening 24/7. So we're dealing with this very sophisticated kind of dance where we have to get parents out of these win-lose battles that often they're invited into, and that they're, and finding opportunities where there can be safe connection, where there might be some capacity to have the young person in their frontal lobes, where there can be some reflection, some empathy, and some future-orientated thinking. So naming violence with the young person when we do see them, it can be hard. We can't always do that easily. We have to have some level of trustability in relationship with them. But it's really helpful to be able to begin to talk about it in a really respectful way. And it's really helping them move away from choosing violence and what are the tools they need to manage their emotions. So often it is around inviting them to take responsibility, and it's often their future picture of themselves that works well, because often young people don't want to grow into violence and don't see themselves as violent adults, and teaching a lot about healthy relationships. And we also have to acknowledge the huge injustice. So there's often an awful lot of injustice that the young person has felt, and that there is always reason behind the violence. And we are, working. I think adolescence is a really wonderful opportunity of being able to help young people grow out of choosing violence rather than grow into it. So it's a really, really good opportunity to engage them because it's not fixed just yet. And I think that we do the best that we can, but there are sometimes times when a young person will continue to choose violence. Or sometimes parental capacity is such that we have to name and acknowledge the grief, the sadness and the hurt. And even that can make a huge difference in taking the heat out of what's happening at home. So, that's it. We're increasingly getting more of that. It's a heck of a lot harder because you also have to distinguish the pattern of violence can sometimes be different. So if I use an example that I worked with, I had 2 young people that were drug and alcohol misusing, and there was power over and lots of disrespect and verbal abuse. But when you unpacked it a lot more, most of the violence was escalating around access to resources, which is money. And actually, as soon as the drug and alcohol issues were addressed and the young people engaged in their own work and support, the violence actually disappeared out of the house. When it comes to patterns around adolescent violence, where parents are tiptoeing around, and it's around, and it is an issue. It's around understanding what the purpose of it is. Sometimes it's the only way that the young person can self-regulate. Sometimes we might have to acknowledge that it's not a great way to survive, but living at home stoned might be the only way that they don't choose violence, or that they're already halfway out of the house, and there's already, it's so late that it's really hard to get the young person to want to stay home, or that parents just might not have any goodwill or empathy left towards them. So sometimes it's about supporting a healthy leaving from home. Yeah. That would be seen as probably as a failure of intervention. Yes. Yeah. So, yeah. So interesting. Pornography might be around self-soothing, unhealthy self-soothing kind of strategies, if you want to say that. It's interesting in our research around what we're finding. So we have our Adolescent Violence Behaviour Questionnaire, and we have significant reduction in all forms of violence in an 8-week program, so violence is out of the home. The thing that's hardest to change that we're noticing, so it's still significant change but still present, is gaming. So social media, World War III around social media is really hard to get out of the house. So I'm guessing it will be around potentially the addictive natures of some of those components, that you're kind of working with that kind of dimension. Yeah, so I think that's something that's quite interesting and evolving. Yeah.
My questions, I've got 2 questions. Just, and I might have missed it, I'm wondering about the age groups that come in and variations in success in working with younger or older teens.
Yeah.
And also about referrals, like who do you find you're getting the referrals from?
Yeah. So when it comes to our group work, most of the referrals are parents, and they're finding us online. Or they've heard about it from somewhere. When it comes to the particular funding that we're in, so we're in an integrated funding model, but we are predominantly in family services. So about 35% is coming from child protection, yeah. And the rest are from other family services organisations, yeah. And age range, there's different opportunities at different times, so because they're different specific life stages, and so capacity to hand responsibility to a young person might be easier when they're 14 and 15 compared to 10 or 11. That being said, I think the thing that makes the difference is that the relationship hasn't been completely ruptured. So if there's a level of goodwill and a level of wanting to make things better, then we can be successful no matter the age. Yeah. You're welcome. Thanks, everyone.